Again, we are pleased to be joined today by Dr. Leslie Alexander, Superintendent of Watauga County Schools. Dr. Alexander, first question for you. How are you? How are your team members? I know you've got a lot of employees that work for you and for the betterment of our children in this community. And I'm sure you haven't been without quite a few things going on here over the last couple of weeks in terms of the operation of the local school system.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. We have a wonderful team. Everybody's been working just super hard and doing what we need to do to make sure we get kids back in school as soon as we can, as safely as we can.
Yeah. So when you talk about that process, schools need buses to bring people to school. They need the physical stability of the schools themselves. You've got 9 facilities in very different parts of this county. How have you and your team assessed what the individual needs for those schools are as you come back to a decision around what the return to school looks like?
Yeah, so right as soon as the hurricane hit, we assessed each campus. We were pretty fortunate that the majority of our campuses were not damaged. Maple had some trees down that landed in the playground equipment area and some fencing. Most of our schools fared fairly well. Valle Crucis obviously was a different situation. And so during this time, we've had to work on a relocation plan for them. So that's kept us busy. And then in addition, several of our school sites, Hardin Park with the childcare, the high school as a distribution site and a feeding site. Cove Creek was a distribution site, as well as Green Valley. And then Green Valley and Mabel were also both feeding sites. So there's been lots of stuff going on our school campuses while we've been preparing for students to come back. But we've also, like just yesterday, we finally got internet back at Parkway. And so, there's been a variety of things that we've been having to make sure are on point before we bring kids back. A lot of people think that, if the internet's out, well, you just don't use your computer, but it actually affects your phone systems and your fire alarm system. So it was good to get that back yesterday.
One of the things that we've talked about before, and I think people that have lived in this area for a long time understand to be true, is that oftentimes it's the schools that are the community centers in places like Bethel and Cove Creek and Mabel, and seeing schools respond in the way they did for people in those communities during such a critical time seemed to be a little bit of that feeling of home, and maybe some familiarity. Did you find that was the case as you talked to your staff that was there and started seeing the families come back around again, that whether it was getting a hot meal or just walking in the hallways, that was helpful, probably as much mentally for people out in those areas as they were dealing with the impacts of the storm?
Yeah, I definitely saw that. I've said this before in other interviews, but 2 days after the hurricane, we were able to locate all of our employees. And so at that point, we were able to enlist their help in finding all of our families. And so by the end of the first week, we were able to know that all of our students were safe and accounted for. So that was a huge win right there. But even as, the weeks have passed, last week we had about 60 military personnel that were deployed to Watauga County to help with the roads. But before the bucket trucks and all that could get here, they were, they were willing to run supplies to families. And so, I called our principals and just said, do you have families that are in need of supplies? And I was just so impressed with our principals because they knew exactly who those families were and what they needed. But they also already had a plan because they had been taking supplies out to their families. So when you think of the school being the hub of the community, it's so true in our county. And, just how well our principals and their staff know their families and are attempting to respond to their needs was heartwarming.
Yeah, speaking of your staff, goes without saying, you're the head of the third largest engine in the community from an employee's perspective. How did you work with your principals to make sure that your staff needs were accounted for? Because I know a lot of businesses were doing the same thing. I'm sure they'd like to just kind of hear some of your perspective about how you triage some of those issues as you were also dealing with some of the facility things that you were mentioning.
Yeah, we had a virtual meeting every day with our principals where we talked about, our 3 big bodies of work that we were focused on. And one of those was our staff and student well-being. And so, each school had a spreadsheet. They had each staff member listed. They would rate them as, if they were displaced and no longer in Watauga, or they were here, but it had damage and they were in need of water or supplies, or if they were fine and could help take care of the other faculty members. So they actually had a little system where they could keep track of the needs of their staff, and then they did the same thing with their students and families. families. And so it was a couple days ago, we would review how many of our teachers are not currently in Watauga because they were displaced. And so, at that point, we had about 30 classroom teachers that would be responsible for supervising students who were not currently in Watauga. But as the week has progressed, the principals feel that those people who were displaced have a means of returning. And so that's something obviously that we have to think about before bringing students back, is do we have the staff and the personnel there to supervise and to instruct them? So we're getting where we need to be with that.
Well, certainly we'll kind of end this conversation with talk about the reentry for school. I know that there was some reporting earlier in the week, and you mentioned it just a moment ago about Valle Crucis, such a beautiful part of our community, one of the hardest hit areas of our community, and with that, the current Valle Crucis Elementary School. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what your operational plans are there, and also how the new school building fared as well, because I know you're under construction with new Valle Crucis School, and just curious how you're working through those steps right now.
So the new school actually fared very well. So we were all very excited about that. And so, that was, of course, one concern, and we feel like that's headed in a good direction. Now, of course, the timeline for the construction project will be impacted by the hurricane. So some paving and grading that was supposed to happen, I think those contractors got pulled off to go do some work in Asheville for recovery work. So we're still dealing with what that means to the timeline of that school. But as far as actual flooding goes, we were pleased with how that school fared. The current Valle Crucis did not fare as well. 20 classrooms were flooded. The gym was flooded. They had about 4 feet of water in that building. So we knew right away that we would not be able to bring students back into that building. So we began looking for spaces that could accommodate that staff and that faculty. Our goal was to keep the kids together. Unfortunately, we could not find a facility large enough to house pre-K through 8th grade. However, we did come up with 2 options, well, 3 really, that we're going to be using to bring those students back. And so the Valle Crucis Conference Center, which is just right around the corner from the current school, is where we intend to house kindergarten through 5th grade. And then the CCC and TI is going to house our 6th through 8th graders. So, most of those kids will be together, but we did have to divide it at that middle school break. But we feel good about that. We feel like those are going to be good spaces to house those students temporarily. And then hopefully the new school will get going on that and be able to be excited to move into that space.
I know that was not the way that you wanted to transition out of a school that's meant so much to so many, but I think there's also something to be said for keeping kids on that side of the county as well. And Valle Crucis Conference Center seems like such an amazing place to have that transitional time. But even from a parental logistics standpoint, keeping folks close to where they're normally used to going at that time of day, I'm sure that aspect of this worked out about as well as it could have.
It really did. I mean, we heard that loud and clear from not only the faculty, but the families, is that they wanted to keep the kids as close to the Valley as they could. And it's not going to be a perfect scenario, but we're going to make it work, and it's going to be good, and we'll learn some things from it. And the move into the new school is going to be quite a bit easier because, those teachers have had to kind of really pare down their materials and think about what's important and what they want to have for their kids. So hopefully we'll get in there and get settled and then just get excited about the move to the new school.
Well, let's talk about the reentry for the rest of this now. I know that's something that parents have been eager to hear as much as we've loved having our kids around. I know they're eager to get back around their friends. What have you settled on for a reentry plan, and how should we expect that to work here over the next several days?
So I meet, it was each morning with emergency management. This past week, it's gone to Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Really impressed with that group of people really coming together to think through things logistically and how we can get kids safely back to where they need to go. We kind of knew right away that we would not be able to use our regular bus routes, but we had hoped that we would be able to potentially use our limited A bus routes, which we use during snow. But in working with NCDOT, they confirmed for us last Thursday that those were going to be several weeks out. And so that just wasn't really an option for us. We don't want kids to be out of school that long. So we moved to the plan of identifying community bus stops where, and the reason is because parents can get a personal vehicle down a road that we can't put a bus on. And so in working with NCDOT, we're looking at the structural integrity of the road. A bus is a very heavy vehicle with lots of students on it, so that sits differently than a personal vehicle. It's also a high profile vehicle, so you have to make sure there's not any low hanging power wires or tree branches in the way. And so that's been our work this week, is to try to identify community stops that parents can take their students to, and then we can take the yellow buses there and pick up students. And our team has identified about 38 community stops. Really thankful for those community partners. So it's not just really identifying the stops, because the stop has to be able to allow the bus to get in and turn around safely. It has to have enough parking for the number of family members that might come to pick up their students. But we also have to get the permission of the business owner or the property owner. And then we also have to get them to sign a form, which makes us legally compliant. And so it's not a quick fix, but the team's worked really hard this week to identify those stops. So our plan is that we will be sending a survey home with parents tomorrow from their principal, asking them to identify which of the stops for their school they plan to use for their student, or if they do not need transportation. That will allow our team next week on Monday and Tuesday to really kind of hone down those stops and try to figure out how many students will be at each one. And so our goal for next week is Monday will be an optional teacher work day. Tuesday and Wednesday will be teacher work days with no students, but then Thursday and Friday, we intend to bring kids back to school on a normal schedule. So we're going to have to figure some things out. This is different. Anytime you do anything different, we're going to have to work through some of the kinks and work out the processes. But we believe that, by partnering with parents, this is our best way to get kids back to school as soon as possible and as safely as possible.
Well, and again, like so many things in all of this that we've been dealing with, the complexity of one action that leads to the next action,
Mm-hmm.
I know has kept you and your staff busy. So I just want to commend you for how quickly, really, a lot of this has come together. This is a playbook that nobody had written down necessarily word for word when we got into this, but you are one of the many organizations up here that is really rallied quite quickly to make some decisions that again, we never thought we'd have to necessarily stare down. One of the things I'd like to end on here is, we've seen such compassionate community support from afar, from within, and as people think about what those students that are going into new classrooms at Valle Crucis might need, or what teachers may need for their classrooms, or students may need for this transitional period back, for those that may want to participate in something like that for the school system, what are the best ways for them to get engaged at this point in time for taking care of some of those short-term needs and make kids feel welcome and teachers feel welcome again when they walk back inside the building?
Sure. Yeah. We're Bailey Little, our director of communication, is organizing those efforts. We've had people call up and, want to know what they can do, or maybe they want to support a particular school and they don't know how to do that. So Bailey and Meredith Jones are keeping a list of people interested in assisting in that way. And so by doing so, we're able to connect them with the needs of the school and sort of keep all that organized. So if you just want to call central office and ask for Bailey Little or Meredith Jones, we'll make sure that we get you connected with a school or a teacher, and we appreciate the support.
All right, I'm going to end on a lighthearted note, and this is going to solve a big community rumor that was going around yesterday, right? So let's pretend for a second that none of this happened, right? And we're just in normal operations mode. It was just a normal October day, right? So take us back to that place. Would yesterday have been a 2-hour delay, or do you think you'd have had to close school because of the snow?
Oh, David, please. I'll take all the snow days you want to give me this over the next 4 days. You can give me all the snow days you want. And then right. I need a little bit of a break.
That's right. Yeah. The curveballs continue to come. Well, Dr. Alexander, thank you so much for your time. And just explaining some of these things. I think it's helpful for people to understand right from you and your leadership position what all went into this. As you said, this is not necessarily a quick thing for some of these more complex parts to come together. But as a parent of two Watauga students, I certainly appreciate your attention to detail to make sure that this is done safely and responsibly. So thank you very much for your time, and best of luck getting everybody back in school next week. And let's hold off on the snow for just a little bit.
Let's hold off. Thanks, David. Bye.